The router is one of the most versatile tools in your workshop. Just a few router bits will allow you to embellish almost any project. But the addition of a router table will greatly open up the possibilities. The surface area of a router table is much greater than that of a handheld router, and it excels at the machining of small, awkward parts that you can't do with a handheld router. This is Wood's version of a router table, and what I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit more about what we did with it, and I'll show you some of the tricks you can do with it. This table consists of a very durable laminate top. We have a hardwood surround. You'll see a couple of feather boards and jam blocks in the top that are fully adjustable. They slide on this little mini track, keeps your wood down when you're doing some of the routing operations. And finally, a really nice dust shield and safety shield on the front that is adjustable. You can't see it, but behind here is also a vacuum port. Kind of helps keep the dust down from there too. We also have a paddle-type safety switch attached to the side of these angled legs, making for a very stable base that can be clamped to any surface. Now that you've seen our table, let me show you some of the things you can do on it. The first thing we're going to do is show you how to make this small piece of trim. It's a very delicate, very nice piece of trim, really tough to do with a handheld router, very easy to do on a router table. But before we start, let me talk to you about a few things. The first is whenever using a router or any other tool, eye protection and hearing protection is a must. The second thing is, on a router table, make sure that your feed direction is always right to left. It's important that you run in that direction because it maintains the most control over the router bit. If this were a handheld router, it would be left to right, but since we've reversed that and put it upside down, you're going to be going right to left. The bit we're going to be using is called a wavy bit, but more importantly, its diameter is about 1 inch. And by running the bit speed commensurate with the diameter of that router bit, we're going to probably be running this router at around 20,000 RPM. If this were a straight bit, I could run it up to as much as 25,000 RPM, but a very large panel raising bit or maybe rail and style set, much larger bits should be run at between 12 and 16,000 RPM. You can check your manuals and your bit specs to make sure that you get the right set. That's how we're going to use this machine. Let me show you how we're going to run this trim. Now the wood we're going to use for this project is called Macquarie. It's a wood I used on a project for the family, and of course they don't make any Macquarie trim, so I had to make my own. We're going to run it through the router, do both sides, and then later on you can take it to a table saw and cut off the ends. I'll mark with a pencil the areas where we would take the table saw and cut that trim off. You'll find that it's a very safe, very easy way to make a lot of trim. Our second trick on the router table is making dowels. Let's just say you can't find the diameter of the species of wood you're looking for. It's easy to do it on a router table. In this case, we're going to take a piece of oak. This is 1 inch stock and create a 1 inch dowel. And to do that, we're going to use a 1/2 inch round over bit. Okay, now here's how the layout works. I've taken a piece of 1 inch stock and put a mark 3 inches in from either end. This just adds a little safety factor. I've also marked the beginning and the end of my routing pass with a piece of tape on the back edge of this router table. To start the route, I'm going to take the leading edge of my piece of wood, set it on that first mark, and by holding well, press it into the bit, run right to left, until the trailing edge of my piece of wood reaches the end, and then pull that piece away. I'll then turn it 90 degrees and do it again, and repeat it until I've routed all 4 sides. Now, one of the tips that comes with this is a relatively large bit. I'm going to do this in 2 passes, because if I try and take all of that material off at one time, there's a good chance I'll get a check. Now I'm going to raise the bit and run this through 4 more times. That will complete the turning. And another thing to think about, this is a 1-inch square, and to make a 1-inch dowel, I use a 1/2-inch roundover bit. If I want a 3/4-inch dowel, I use a 3/8 router bit, and so on. Here's a quick tip. When routing end grain on a piece of wood, it's real easy to get blowout. It's because this edge is unsupported. Here's a very inexpensive way to stop that. This is a piece of MDF. I've cut a hole in it. Here's another one with a little block glued to the front of it, and it just allows me to provide support on the back of this piece when running through the router table. It runs right up against the fence, no fancy jigs needed or anything, and it does a great job. Let me show you. No tear out, just a beautiful edge. And I'll tell you what's also nice about this. When this begins to wear out, just use a table saw and shorten it, and when it gets too short to use, throw it out and start over. Now another use for your router table is as a joiner. If you don't have a joiner, don't worry. You can use your router table and what's called a pattern bit to do that work for you. Here's the pieces of stock that you need. The first is a small piece of Formica. This is relatively thin, and what I did is I double stick taped it to the outfeed edge of this router table's fence. But before I put it on there, I took a piece of sandpaper or sanding block like this, and I just radiused this edge. I'd like to kind of sand that down a little bit so that the wood doesn't get stuck on it as it passes by that side. I now took a pattern bit. This is what they look like. This is called a bottom bearing pattern bit, whose bearing, the outside edge of which matches perfectly with that router blade. When I put that on the table and have my Formica double stick taped to the other side, I can now take a straight edge and adjust my fence so as I come back at that bit, I am just touching that bearing. It now allows me to run a piece of material on the infeed edge that will joint that board as it runs on the outside. Let me show you how that works. What a beautiful jointed edge. All right, our last tip involves the use of a pattern bit, but this time without the fence on the back, and also to recreate a leg. This is one leg in a project that I made that had 4, and of course the object is to have all 4 legs hit the floor at the same time. So I created a pattern to replicate these legs dozens of times. The object behind it is to take a pattern like this, and I use 1/4-inch hardboard, and use double stick tape to adhere it to a blank piece of wood. Using a jigsaw, scroll saw, bandsaw, cut that piece of wood to within a 1/16 of an inch or so away from that pattern. And now using the pattern bit, as you see on the table here, we're going to run this past the bit, and again, riding on this bearing, everything that sticks beyond that bearing or beyond this pattern will be trimmed off. To create a beautiful leg, let me show you how it works. So now let's strip away our pattern. Be careful here because you don't want to break the pattern. If I take my existing leg and lay this onto it, you'll notice the profile is exactly the same. It's a great way to provide multiple legs. They're all the same and they'll fit well. Now I hope you've liked what you've seen. You're only limited by your imagination and the number of things that you can do with a router table. If you want information on how to build this table, or on tips, techniques, and some projects that will utilize it, please see us at woodmagazine.com. Now get out there and start routing.